Welcome to the International Conference on Education and Training Evaluation, Improving Learning Outcomes and Supporting Economic Growth. To attend and participate, choose your favorite language. Sign in, then click on Conference. For further information, to ask questions directly, click here. To download the conference presentations, click here. To share ideas and opinions, please visit the conference forum. For technical support, click here. مرحباً بكم في المؤتمر الدولي لتقويم التعليم والتدريب، تجويد نواتج التعلم ودعم النمو الاقتصادي. للحضور والمشاركة، اختر لغتك المفضلة، قم بتسجيل الدخول، ثم الضغط على المؤتمر لمعرفة المزيد من المعلومات. في حال رغبتك بطرح سؤال مباشر، اضغط هنا. لتحميل العروض، اضغط هنا. لتبادل الآراء، قم بزيارة المنتدى. للدعم الفني، اضغط هنا. أيها الحفل الكريم، في الوقت الذي يعلن فيه انطلاق فعاليات المؤتمر الدولي لتقويم التعليم والتدريب، نعلن هنا عن بوادر نجاحه وتميزه من خلال تنظيم 21 ورشة تطوير مهني تخصصية قدمت افتراضياً خلال ال4 أيام الماضية على هامشه، وحققت تغطية بلغت 100% لعدد المقاعد المتاحة، والبالغ عددها 840 مقعداً، إذ شارك في تقديمها نخبة من المدربين والخبراء المحليين والدوليين من منسوبي الهيئة والجامعات. وهذا أمر يعزز ثقتنا في نخبة الخبراء الدوليين والمحليين المشاركين في المؤتمر، إضافة للكفاءات المؤهلة التي تتوافر في الهيئة والجهود الجبارة التي بذلت ولا تزال، متطلعين إلى أفق أعلى. Dear respectable audience, as we declare the launch of this conference, we announce the promising sign of success and excellence through organizing 21 specialized professional development workshops virtually, preceding the conference and achieving 100% coverage of 840 seats. These workshops were presented by national, regional, and international pioneering experts, specialists, and academics. السادة والسيدات الحضور، اسمحوا لي الآن أن أتشرف بدعوة راعي الحفل معالي المستشار بالديوان الملكي رئيس مجلس إدارة هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب معالي الدكتور أحمد بن محمد العيسى لإلقاء كلمته إذانا بافتتاح أعمال المؤتمر الدولي لتقويم التعليم والتدريب. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure and honor to invite His Excellency Dr. Ahmad Al Issa, Chairman of the Education and Training Evaluation Commission Board of Directors, to address the conference with his opening speech. فليتفضل معاليكم مشكورا. Please welcome His Excellency.
الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أصحاب المعالي، أصحاب السعادة، الأخوة الأفاضل والأخوات الفضليات، حضورنا الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إنه لمن دواعي سعادتي أن أتحدث إليكم اليوم مرحبا بكم في افتتاح المؤتمر الدولي لتقويم التعليم والتدريب الذي يعقد على هذا العام على هامش رئاسة المملكة العربية السعودية لمجموعة العشرين تحت عنوان تجويد نواتج التعلم ودعم النمو الاقتصادي. وبهذه المناسبة التي يلتقي فيها رقيها ونوعها بسمو هدفها، لا يسعني إلا أن أتوجه بالشكر والتقدير لمقام خادم الحرمين الشريفين الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز آل سعود، وإلى سمو ولي عهده الأمين حفظهما الله على الدعم المستمر والدائم لقطاع التعليم والتدريب عموما، ولهيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب خصوصا، ودعم مشروعاتها التطويرية الهادفة إلى تقويم التعليم والتدريب وتحسين جودتهما. وقد أضحى هذا المؤتمر الدولي الذي تنظمه الهيئة كل عامين منبراً عالمياً يتم من خلاله بلورة الأفكار والرؤى المختلفة حيال آليات تقويم التعليم والتدريب وتجويدهما. ويأتي هذا المؤتمر وقد حقق العالم تقدماً ملموساً في توفير التعليم من خلال المدارس والكليات والجامعات، مع تحسن كبير في معدلات التحاق الأطفال بالمدارس، وكذلك في معدلات الالتحاق بالتعليم العالي، حتى زال الكثير من القلق المتعلق بالجوانب الكمية للتعليم. لكن تحدي جودة التعليم لا يزال مؤرقاً. فخبير اقتصاديات التعليم إريك هانوشك سيعرض في هذا المؤتمر الدليل العلمي على الارتباط بين التعليم والنمو الاقتصادي، وكيف أن جودة التعليم المقيسة بأداء طلبة كل دولة في الاختبارات الدولية هي المؤثر الحقيقي في دعم الاقتصاد. أما عدد أعوام التعليم أو نسب الالتحاق بالمؤسسات التعليمية فلم تعد مؤثرة كما كانت في الماضي. ووفق مؤشر رأس المال البشري الذي أعلنه البنك الدولي في شهر سبتمبر الماضي، يحقق الأفراد الذين تبلغ أعمارهم 18 عاماً 11.3 عاماً دراسياً في المتوسط العالمي من 14 عاماً متوقعاً. لكن حينما تعدل أعوام الدراسة تلك بحسب أداء كل دولة في الاختبارات الدولية الشهيرة البيتسا والتيمز والبيرلز، فإن أعوام التعليم المتوقعة تنخفض إلى 7.8 أعوام في المتوسط العالمي، وكأننا نفقد 30% من أعوام التعلم الرسمية بسبب تدني الجودة. وهذا يعني بتعبير عام أننا نفقد عاماً من كل 3 أعوام من التعليم بكل ما تضمنه هذا الفاقد من مصروفات مباشرة أو كلفة غير مباشرة، متمثلة في أوقات الأفراد والفرص البديلة لموارد المجتمع. وتأكيداً على أهمية الجودة، فقد تغيرت أهداف التنمية الأممية، فبعد أن كانت تستهدف تحسين معدلات الالتحاق بالتعليم أصبحت تركز على الجودة، بدليل أن أهداف التنمية المستدامة 2015 إلى 2030 نصت في هدفها الرابع الخاص بالتعليم على ضمان التعليم الجيد المنصف والشامل وتعزيز فرص التعلم مدى الحياة للجميع. ولا شك في أن تحسين جودة التعليم ينطوي على كثير من التحديات، فهو لن يكون أيسر من تحسين الالتحاق بالتعليم الذي تطلب من دول العالم عقوداً من العمل، وسيظل التقويم الصادق هو نقطة الانطلاق نحو تحسين جودة التعليم. لذلك اهتمت المنظمات الأممية بالدراسات التقويمية الدولية منذ مطلع الألفية، وأنشأت كثير من الدول هيئات التقويم الوطنية رغبة في القياس الصادق والتشخيص، وأملا في هداية خطط وجهود التحسين. سيحدثنا في الجلسة الافتتاحية للمؤتمر بعد قليل السيد أندرياس شلايشر، وهو الذي يقود قطاع التعليم والمهارات في منظمة التعاون الاقتصادي والتنمية منذ عقدين من الزمن، ويقف خلف الدراسة التقويمية الأشهر عالمياً البيتزا فكرة وتنفيذاً منذ إنشائها. سيتحدث عن التقويم من أجل التحسين، وكيف نستخلص الدليل من بيانات التقويم ونبني عليها خططنا التحسينية، ثم نقود التغيير بنجاح. لكن وبينما كانت دول العالم تتلمس طريقها في النهوض بجودة التعليم، باغتتها جائحة كورونا، حيث انقطع الأطفال عن التعليم الحضوري للمدارس في معظم الأحوال منذ شهر مارس الماضي، مع محاولات لتعويض الحضور للمدارس بالتعليم عن بعد، انتفاعاً من تقدم تقنيات المعلومات والاتصالات. ولا شك في أن أزمة كورونا بانعكاساتها الاقتصادية ثبطت جهود تحسين التعليم، وربما أعادت العالم للوراء، خاصة مع تفاقم مشكلة عدم تكافؤ الفرص ونقص الموارد التي تتطلبها جهود التحسين المكلفة. ومن المؤسف أن تقنية المعلومات والاتصالات حتى الآن لم تظهر ما يعد بتعويض التعليم الحضوري. كما قال سلمان خان مؤسس أكاديمية خان الإلكترونية: لا يمكن أن تكون المدارس الافتراضية بديلاً مثالياً للتعلم وجهاً لوجه، لكن هناك فرص واسعة للتحسين، وهو الأمر الذي دعا إليه أنطونيو جوتريش الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة للقول إنه بعد السيطرة محلياً على الانتقال عدوى كوفيد-19 ينبغي أن تكون الأولوية القصوى هي إعادة التلاميذ إلى المدارس والمؤسسات التعليمية بأكبر قدر ممكن من الأمان. وفي ظل عدم ثبوت مفعول أي لقاح لكوفيد-19 حتى الآن، واحتمال استمرار جائحة كورونا وابتعاد الأطفال عن الحضور للمدارس، ستتراجع جودة التعليم غالباً، وقد تتراجع الدول عن مستويات الأداء التي حققتها من قبل في توفير التعليم وزيادة معدلات الالتحاق وأعوام التعلم، فتصبح المشكلة مضاعفة في كم التعليم وجودته، فضلاً عن تفاقم فروق التحصيل بين الطلبة وزيادة حدة أثر العوامل الخارجية الاجتماعية والاقتصادية. معالي رئيس هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب أخي الدكتور حسام زمان سيعرض في الجلسة الافتتاحية هذه جهود هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب في المملكة العربية السعودية لممارسة عمليات التقويم في أثناء تعليق الحضور للمؤسسات التعليمية بسبب جائحة كورونا. ولا شك أنه سيبرز الدروس التي يمكن مشاركتكم إياها في طريق الإضاءة لجهود تحسين التعليم. أما في المملكة العربية السعودية فإن التعليم ينعم بعناية خاصة، فلم تتأثر الموارد المخصصة للتعليم خلال هذه الجائحة، وظلت مستويات الإنفاق كما هي، بل عززت موارد التعليم للتحول نحو التعليم عن بعد، بما يقتضيه هذا من توفير تقنيات المعلومات والاتصالات وبرامج التواصل عن بعد، بالرغم من أن المملكة واجهت ما واجهته كثير من دول العالم من تحديات التحول إلى التعليم عن بعد. وتعد جودة التعليم مرتكزاً أساسياً لرؤية المملكة 2030، فهذه الرؤية تدفع لأن يكون الإنسان هو المحرك الرئيس للتنمية الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والثقافية، باعتباره العامل الأهم في التحول من اقتصاد يعتمد الموارد الطبيعية إلى اقتصاد قائم على المعرفة، يعتمد على براعة أبنائه من الجنسين وما يمتلكونه من عناصر المعرفة والمهارة وما يحملونه من روح المسؤولية تجاه وطنهم ونهضته وتنميته. وامتدادا لهذه الغايات ووصولا للتميز، فإن بلادنا بقيادة خادم الحرمين الشريفين الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز أيده الله، وولي عهده الأمين صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير محمد بن سلمان بن عبد العزيز حفظه الله، قد أولت جودة التعليم والتدريب وكفاءتهما العناية والدعم والتطوير، اعتمادا على الأسس العلمية والتقويم الصادق والدقيق. وفي هذا المقام يسعدني أن أوجه الشكر لوزارة التعليم في المملكة العربية السعودية وللجامعات وللمؤسسة العامة للتدريب التقني والمهني على ما بذلته وتبذله من ترتيبات وإجراءات وجهود حثيثة وهادفة إلى إيجاد بدائل وحلول إلكترونية لتوفير التعليم عن بعد في ظل مفاجأة وتسارع الأحداث مع انتشار الجائحة، وتوظيفها لجميع الموارد المتوافرة لديها من نظم ومنصات لضمان استمرار الخدمات التعليمية للجميع. وفي الختام يطيب لي أن أثمن وأقدر الجهود المبذولة من معالي رئيس الهيئة الدكتور حسام بن عبد الوهاب زمان، ومن رؤساء اللجان التنظيمية والعلمية وكافة الجهات والمتحدثين الدوليين والمحليين الذين تعاونوا مع الهيئة في الإعداد والتجهيز لتنظيم المؤتمر ورعايته، وعلى رأسها الأمانة السعودية لمجموعة العشرين، راجيا لقطاع التعليم والتدريب في المملكة وفي العالم أن يتجاوز تحدياته، وتمنياتي لهيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب وللمشاركين في هذا المؤتمر التوفيق والنجاح. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا معاليكم. Thank you, Your Excellency. ضيوفنا الكرام، ما شهدته المملكة من إصلاحات واسعة في بيئتها التعليمية هو ثمرة للتعاون الوثيق بين الجهات ذات العلاقة، وفي إطار ما تقوم به هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب لأجل أن تكون محفزة ومؤثرة في رفع جودة التعليم والتدريب وكفاءاتهما بالمملكة لأعلى المستويات العالمية. ندعو الآن معالي الدكتور حسام بن عبد الوهاب زمان رئيس هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب لنتعرف على الدروس المستفادة من تجربة هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب في تقويم التعليم والتدريب خلال جائحة فيروس كورونا. Our respectable audience, the wide reforms that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has witnessed in its educational environment is the result of close cooperation between the relevant national authorities. The Education and Training Evaluation Commission is playing a major role in enhancing the quality and efficiency of education and training in the Kingdom to the highest international levels. We are honored to invite His Excellency Dr. Husam bin Abdul Wahab Zaman, Chairman of the Education and Training Evaluation Commission, to learn more about the Commission's experience during the coronavirus pandemic and the lessons learned in the field of assessment of education and training. معالي الدكتور حسام بن عبد الوهاب زمان حاصل على كل من دكتوراه وماجستير في تحليل السياسات التعليمية من جامعة بيتسبرغ في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. يشغل حاليا منصب رئيس هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب منذ 2019، وهو عضو مجلس إدارة المركز الوطني لقياس أداء الأجهزة العامة أداء منذ يونيو 2020. شغل عددا من المناصب، منها مدير جامعة الطائف ومدير عام المركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم وأمين عام مجلس المركز ذاته والمشرف العام على فرع الجامعة السعودية الإلكترونية في المدينة المنورة، ورئيس لجنة جائزة مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج للبحوث والدراسات. فليتفضل معاليكم مشكورا. Please welcome His Excellency.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله. صاحب المعالي رئيس مجلس الإدارة الدكتور أحمد العيسى، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، ضيوفنا الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اسمحوا لي بداية أن أتقدم باسمكم لمعالي راعي حفلنا الكريم الدكتور أحمد العيسى على كريم اهتمامه ودعمه حفظه الله لهيئتكم، هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب، ولمشاريعها حقيقة، والتي من أهمها ويجسدها اليوم هذا المشروع، مشروع مؤتمر الدولي لتقويم التعليم والتدريب، والذي تنظمه الهيئة كل سنتين، في استمرار أعمال هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب في جميع الظروف ولله الحمد، وبتوظيف جيد لآليات التحول الرقمي والتقنيات المختلفة طال جميع الجوانب، بما فيها يعني هذا المؤتمر بدعم من معاليه ومن مجلس الإدارة الموقر، في ظل حقيقة دعم ومتابعة واهتمام من حكومة سيدي خادم الحرمين الشريفين وسمو سيدي ولي العهد حفظهم الله بقطاع التعليم والتدريب عموما، وبمجال تقويم التعليم والتدريب على وجه الخصوص، وهذه الهيئة هي الجهة الممثلة لهذا العمل. سنستعرض بحول الله تعالى في هذا العرض أهم أعمال هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب ومبادراتها خلال الجائحة فيروس كورونا، والدروس المستفادة من هذه التجربة. سنتناول بحول الله تعالى في هذه الجلسة 3 موضوعات رئيسية تجسد ال3 مبادرات الأساس في عمل ال3 المبادرات الأساس في عمل الهيئة خلال الجائحة، وهي تنفيذ الاختبار التحصيلي عن بعد، وتنفيذ زيارات التقويم المؤسسي والبرامجي عن بعد وإعداد متطلباتها، وأخيراً الدراسة التقويمية للتعليم والتدريب خلال الجائحة. فيما يتعلق بالاختبار التحصيلي عن بعد، كانت أهم وأولى المبادرات التي قامت بها الهيئة خلال الجائحة، وجاءت حقيقة يعني مع بدايات انتشار هذه الجائحة ومع نهاية الفصل الدراسي الثاني للعام الماضي، وتتجسد أهمية هذا المشروع من كونه أن الاختبار التحصيلي هو أحد اختبارين تنفذهما هيئة تقويم التعليم والتدريب كمعيار للقبول، والاختبار الآخر هو اختبار القدرات العامة. ويعتبر يعني هذا الاختبار التحصيلي هو أهم معايير القبول في الجامعات، حيث يعطى عادة الوزن الأعلى بين معايير القبول، فهو أعلى من المعدل التراكمي للثانوية العامة، وأعلى من اختبار القدرات العامة من حيث الوزن النسبي عادة. وأيضا يعني يتجلى أهمية الموضوع في كونه لم يسبق للاختبار التحصيلي أن نفذ عن بعد، بحيث يختبر الطالب من المنزل، لكنه كان ينفذ بصيغتين ورقية ومحوسبة، ويغطي مجالين أيضا: الاختبار التحصيلي للتخصصات العلمية، والاختبار التحصيلي للتخصصات النظرية لطلبة المسار الأدبي. عند اتخاذ القرار حقيقة باستمرار عمليات التقويم، وخصوصا ما يتعلق بالاختبارات يعني ذات المدى الواسع وعالية المخاطر مثل الاختبار التحصيلي، كان هناك حقيقة عدد من المعايير التي تم وضعها للمفاضلة بين منصات الاختبار المتوفرة والتي يمكن من خلالها تقديم هذه الخدمة. وكان من أهم معايير المفاضلة هذه هو التزام هذه المنصات.
One of the important services and standards is that these protocols and coding protocols should be used according to the highest international standards, and the ideas of monitoring the tests, recording the tests, and with the lowest use possible of the internet WinBats in order to have options for all different environments of the strength of the internet signal. And also one important thing was to deny the access for all of the networks during the access, and to detect and to end any illegal access of the examiner to any of these networks, and also the options of downloading and uploading, and also the idea of taking making sure that no screenshots can be taken, so that the test will not be spread to other examiners, and also coding and using artificial intelligence technologies to monitor the behaviors of the examiners. We have more than 300,000 students, males and females, and we need to have cybersecurity solutions to protect the test and the outcomes, and also to apply and implement the standards of quality and quality assurance. All praise due to Allah. The segment of students who ended high school education, who finished high school education, were uh, to have this test, and more more than more than 300,000 of them, more than 200,000 of them used the online option, which is 70% of them, and also other alternative options were provided to other students who did not have the ability to have the technology that will enable them to attend from their homes, or those who had the desire to attend to the computer-based centers. So generally speaking, the rates of attendance to the test online was better and more than the rates of attending to the test centers of computer-based options. But all praise due to Allah, all of them were more than 85%, and online was more than 90%, as you see in this table. Online test was also very important, and a part of it was provided according to coping with the situation of COVID-19 crisis, and also the situation was good, with the exception of the material and the questions related to the second semester of last year, so that we took in consideration the crisis that happened and the online option that was at the second semester. So we had 16 templates for the scientific division, 8 for theoretical decisions, covering 7 materials, and all the questions were through the multiple choice questions, MCQ. One of the most important things that we have when we speak about different situations is that the test was important, and we had to make sure that we monitor it and it is safe enough and protected. That's why we had to weigh up our solutions. And also the second step was to monitor that and to use artificial intelligence to study the behavior of the examiner. So we had 6 main steps, starting with the registration of the and recording the audio visual of the examiner, all of the test time, also behavior, recording the behavior and analyzing the behavior of the examiner using AI. Also, the third step, which is detecting the illegal actions that may occur by the examiner. The fourth step is that a human eye will detect and analyze the AI results and make sure if the illegal action was really happening. The fifth step will be a supervising and control commission that will re-study the results of the human eyes detectors. After that, the sixth step, the legal action or the legal committee will give their final decision. It is very important to mention that only that we gave an obligatory opportunity to all students who wanted to examine online to go through this experience in a trial version of the test, so that they make sure that they are capable of committing to the test and what the illegal actions that may affect their experience. All of these steps were attended in both the trial and the actual tests. In the next situation, these are the results for the online test. And as you see here, this is the segment that I want to focus on, because this is the most important thing that we use in order to make sure of the quality of the test. We have more than 217,000 examiners online. 30% of them used, where 30% of them did not have any illegal actions or any violations, but 70% using AI were considered videos of violations. So we went back to the second stage, where human eyes reviewed these violations and these videos, and we found that 88% of these states or these cases that were considered violations by AI, 88% were passed. They were just normal actions or normal behaviors, not real violations. 12%, only 12% were considered violations by the first step. They went to the inspectors and the supervisors, which is the third step. 41% of them through the second review were considered not violations. So 59% of the violation cases are still considered violations in light of what the supervising committee saw. After that, they were provided to the legal committee or the legal administration to give their final opinion. Compared to the paper-based tests and the computer-based tests, we found that it was a very successful experience, and the legal department found that there were 1% of actual violations that required the cancellation of the test. The number was 2,242 cases. This is regarding the quality of the education. As for the education, the test itself, the test was prepared in a short period of time, and we had the option to provide a short version of the test compared to the complete test. And the original test, the complete test, uh, we had a rate of 0.91 rate of success, and also in our version, which is the half test, it was 0.84, which is more than enough in order to say that our test was good enough. We also benefited from that experience. We prepared a study of 177,000 students, males and females, in order to know more using the repeated measuring way or method, in order to send a survey related of 15 items. And the survey was provided before and after the trial version of the test, and also after the actual test. The survey was stable and the rate was not less than 0.89. The results were very good, and it referred that the results towards online achievement tests was better than expected, and it was better than before and after the trial version. Also, the results of the surveys after the trial test was better than the achievement results of the surveys before the test. They considered it as important as the paper-based test, as reliable as the paper-based test, and we had an overall improvement in their trust and confidence in this test, and it improved maybe more than 10% after each of the survey's phases. One of the most important lessons learned as well of the continuous evaluation experience is that all these cases of different national and international efforts on the national level requires good partnership of all different uh, stakeholders, and we would like to express our thankfulness for all of the governmental entities that participated with us under the umbrella of the National Committee of the Digital Transformation. We wouldn't be successful like we were without their participation. We had a success rate of 93% because of the participation of these stakeholders and these partners, like the different ministers and different ministries. I'd like to thank them a lot for their support and for the confidence that they put in us in order to continue evaluation efforts in spite of the crisis. We also had some other lessons learned through the achievement tests and the other evaluation in our ETEC. Sometimes we say in Arabic that we thank crises for giving us new options that we wouldn't think of without having the crisis. We knew that online tests is less costly in terms of the direct or indirect tests without compromising the quality of the test itself. Also, we have lesser periods of time in terms of announcing the results. Also, the platforms of online testing provide a lot of indicators for measurement that will help not only in implementing tests, but in building them in the future. Also, we have different wider options of online tests, not only in crisis times, but it can be a strategic solution that will be one of the alternatives, if not one of the best and most important solutions in the future. It is very important as well that digital transformation in tests should be accompanied with specialized research and studies for the psychometric aspects as well as the ethical, cultural, and educational aspects as well. There are things that we need to take care of, like hosting data, the privacy, and the protection of the privacy of the examiners. We have an open invitation for experts and investors in the field of education because we have a lot of investment opportunities for online test solutions. We also have a necessity based on the study that we have conducted that we need to anticipate the possible problems and to positively deal with these concerns in order to get over them and to avoid them as much as possible. And also we need to benefit from our experiences like we did in the ETEC because of the reactions of the social media people. We calmly and in a quiet way uh, tackled the situation, and with the directions of the head of the board of directors and the board of directors, we communicated with people and we continued communicating with different partners in order to clarify the positive points and the positive outcomes that will arise and to deal and to answer the negative concern that may be arise. Also, it was proven that it is important to review our regulations and our uh, rules in order to provide better solutions for the people, especially the students with disabilities and with special needs. And it is important for the computer-based centers to be ready. And we provided supports, and our universities provided support, providing solutions for the students who didn't have technical solutions and technical abilities. Also, finally, it is important to continue providing training through before and after crises for all stakeholders of the tests, especially the inspectors. This was the first experience. The second experience that was provided by the uh, ex- by by the ETEC is the online visits for evaluation of the programs and the facilities. Our EDEC had to cancel a large number of visits for the educational, higher education facilities for accreditation purposes because of the COVID-19 crisis. So, because there were no alternatives at that time to continue our evaluation processes, but we had another thing to do, another assignment, which is to have a study, to conduct a study related to the quality of the educational processes in the private schools or the education sector. It was required by the EDEC. So we thought it is very important to continue this study, and it was relevant to try some of the online visits or virtual visits technologies and online visits mechanisms and the digital transformation alternatives to continue working on this study so that we continue making the visits and providing technical support for the teams working in these visits. We found that all praise is due to Allah. We could do this work well, especially after the ETEC started studying the international standards and different international organizations that continued working through the COVID-19 crisis. So we continued working and we developed a template that uh, we used in order to provide a list of inspections and evidence in order to collect them so that we do the review in order to cover all of the fields and elements of evaluation, also providing a cloud computing space to provide and to save all of the metrics of the documents and provide a guideline for the private education facilities with the documents needed and also the access to these documents when needed, also coordinating with the coordinators of universities, colleges to assign the deadlines and the timings and the suitable time, appropriate timings, whether AM or PM for the national and international people using different platforms like Cisco, WebEx, and Zoom, also providing a template for the attendees of the interviews that will be sent in a good time before the interview is done, and also that all of the stakeholders should be attending. And we will conclude these interviews between 45 to 60 minutes for every uh, meeting. Also, these were virtual tours that we have done inside the educational processes and educational facilities using Zoom so that the evaluation teams will see the places will as if they really are there in order to document that with videos, documents, and screenshots and photos, like the laboratories and the different facilities of the universities and college, and all of this will be saved on the cloud computing space for this school or college. We have scheduled more than 91 uh, accreditation program visit, 9 visits for the institutional accreditation until the 15th of October. 5 accreditation visits for institutions were done, and we have 190 inspectors were invited. 10,000 participants attended who benefited from this program in these virtual visits. We also implemented and scheduled more than 14 workshops for the visits and for the attendees. Also, more than 240 visits sessions were implemented using WebEx platform. Also, we will continue working during this current semester. One of the most important lessons learned from this second experience is the continuity of the educational process, which is the oath that we took in Saudi Arabia in order to continue our evaluation processes. Also, technology and social media, artificial intelligence are more than enough to elevate the quality of work and the continuity of the monitoring of work. It is also important to improve and to build upon the positive directions towards the agile organizations implementations. And also, we need to confirm that it is very important to have objective measurements of the quality of the outcomes of education, also to build our abilities in order to have this online correspondence. This is the third experience, which is a brief of the most important lessons learned of a study, evaluation study that was done by the ETEC during the COVID-19 crisis at the end of the last educational semester. This study was aiming at finding the quality of education for the learning, e-learning and education training evaluation during the COVID-19 crisis, also identifying the challenges that institutions face, also providing recommendations. This study was conducted during the period after the conclusion of the second semester and before the starting of this first semester of this year, so that we could benefit from the experiences of last year and to improve what we want in the next year, which is the current year. Most of the lessons learned and most of the challenges that were identified were beneficial and we could implement them in the new year that started weeks ago. Because we conducted this session after the end of the second semester of last year, we needed to diversify the different kinds of our evidence, and we used the triangulation uh, method so that we cover all of the people and all the stakeholders, teachers, parents, students, deans, and faculties, and in order to analyze the different platforms that were used in these institutions. It is no secret that education in Saudi Arabia during COVID-19 crisis was depended on different ideas of platforms. For example, in public education, we had LMS. We also had private platforms for the resources of education. Like in terms of LMS, we had the unified platform and the future platform or the future gate. As for the resources of education, we had learning resources. We have AIN, National Education, and we have AIN channels. All of these platforms had their purposes and their limits and their goals to support students and schools. One of the most important results was to identify the educational waste that we had and analyzing Arabic language materials, mathematics, and sciences, comparing the 8th to the 18th weeks, the period where e-learning started, considering the results of education as a potential waste if no students continued learning. So we noticed that the potential educational waste during this area was considered important and it was very important, not less than 38% of the expected educational goals of these weeks for these materials or subjects. And it may be 62% in maths and 33% in science. One of the most important things that we knew from this experience is to compare this study to other international experiences in different countries that we came through this study. Most of these online solutions all over the world did not succeed in providing complete services. Uh, so there were incomplete abilities before the COVID-19, and any of the countries, we had some potentially effective uh, in countries in the decentralized educational services countries. It did not depend on the availability of technologies of online situation, but also it requires new roles, new authorities, authorizations, strategies of leadership, and providing works for students, for the teachers, and changing the methods of evaluation. It is no secret that school is not only a place for providing teaching, but it is a whole life experience, and it cannot be summarized to just or cannot be limited to just an online lecture. And this was the problem that was faced by different countries all over the world at the beginning of COVID-19. It was also clear, like Dr. Al Issa mentioned in his opening speech, and as other experts, international experts said that e-learning will not be the alternative, the complete alternative of one-to-one learning or one-on-one learning. Many students or many children do not find the enough educational services. School provided alternative and compensation to any weakness that they have at home. So the study also said that not all subjects can be studied online because it's not only knowledge-based skills. There are social skills, that depend on interaction among students and other behaviors that need to be raised psychologically, socially, and physically, and it cannot be covered fully through online education. Also, a lot of challenges that were posed, especially in medical and engineering subjects in higher education and other training education and vocational education, although online education provided some support, but it required a lot of cost and a lot of training. Also, one very important idea that was provided by the uh, education is that there were a lot of waste that was provided, like what happened at the end of the semester of last year. This waste may be increased because of the summer vacation that was long, and it is important to compensate for this waste that happened. And this is a priority not only for the beginning of this year, but it may continue to this year and the coming years as well. As it is said, this doesn't mean that we marginalize the previous skills. The coming skills will not be present without having the previous skills. There are different evidence that similar situations like COVID-19 means that if we do not compensate for the wasted skills, the missed skills, we will not be able to have the coming skills, and this will weaken their abilities in the future. So it is important that educational systems in the future will depend, and there will be differences according to the differences of dealing with the current missing skills. It is important to compensate for the missing skills, and the study said that we need to need each individual to study according to his own or her own skills, and to increase the time allocated for some subjects. The study also assured that it is important to increase the authorizations of the authorities of the educational directories, because some of the problems or challenges are different from one directory to the other. There are also another important lesson, which is the importance of developing effective mechanisms to improve the performance of public and private schools all at once, so that we need to, at least as a minimum, to have experts of evaluation attend to make sure that there is effective interaction between the students and the teachers. Also, there are templates that can be considered successful and unique and exceptional during COVID-19 crisis, especially that some private schools and private institutions. And it is important to speak about these successful stories and to make them available. There were other pioneering solutions from a number of teachers who were excellent, in addition to what we see now in terms of the national experience of madrasati or my school, which was very important, benefiting from what happened last year and the evaluation that followed last year. It is also important, according to the study, to provide more authorities to universities, directories of education, schools, and other financial authorities to diversify solutions and to uh, face any urgent challenge. Also, there weren't enough platforms to provide comprehensive solutions for all, so it was important to provide solutions for the diversification of these platforms if necessary. It is very important, as well as one of the most important recommendations of the study, to take care of the analytical evaluation measures and the platforms of online education and online testing, governing these online platforms, and to train the evaluation experts and share the lessons learned with the educational societies, and giving them the opportunity and the authority to have virtual live monitoring of the performance of teachers and the systems of education in different schools. Also, one of the strategic solutions that was provided by the study is that regardless of this situation, there is an important work provided regarding the education and the schools with different ideas, providing the development of different mechanisms to continue interacting with these systems. And the sustainability is important in terms of using these ideas. So in the future, we need to have at least one online education day each month in order to continue benefiting from these results and to preserve our abilities. Like we had a mechanism for training schools on evacuation in urgent cases, we can have a similar case to have one day of online teaching every month in the future. And this can be obligation for all institutions in the future so that all of these mechanisms and abilities will continue to exist in case we need them. Also, we need to develop mechanisms of online education evaluation. This includes periodic tests, whether diagnostic tests or achievement tests or final tests, and also benefit from AI technologies and support teachers in benefiting from these platforms. EDEC saw that there is an improvement of the uh, skills of students after they have attended the trial test before the actual test. Also, one of the most important results that we face is the uh, availability of these solutions as a priority in 2021 in order to compensate for the missing educational skills. This may require additional lessons to be taught, also providing educational management methods to be provided hand in hand with the main educational efforts. So some students may require a lot of effort to compensate, not only in the coming year, but in many years. So we need to continue following up and monitoring these segment of students to compensate their missing skills. Also, one of the most important things that we saw in the future is that we needed to continue benefiting from the uh, competencies-based education, and also making sure that education is a national process and we need everybody to be responsible. And it is a priority for the Ministry of Education, for the universities, for the TVTC, for the colleges. But it is not only their responsibility, it is the responsibility of everybody. And we need to tackle this responsibility well. Also to confirm that teachers have a very important role, and we need to provide them with the continuous education and training so that they have better abilities to continue teaching using these online situations. Also, to strengthen the relation between families and schools so that they all work together with society in order to uh, uplift this process. Also, one of the recommendations that it is important to not neglect other roles, especially the student supervisor, the supervision, educational supervision staff. All of them require online abilities to continue working during the crisis. Also, it is important to have their work in natural process of education as it is in the online situation as well. It is important to have the ability to build educational teachers online and to take care of the options provided for people with students with disabilities and students with special needs, and not to neglect them while providing solutions for these segments. Thank you for listening, and sorry for taking long, and I hope that we will have success in the future. Thank you for listening, and I hope that our solutions and our lessons will be coping up to the aspirations of Saudi Arabia in the field of education and the concern of our wise leaders. Thank you again, and peace be upon you all.
شكرا معاليكم. Thank you, Your Excellency. السيدات والسادة، رحبوا معنا برئيس قطاع التعليم والمهارات بمنظمة التعاون والتنمية الاقتصادية، الدكتور أندرياس شلايشر، وذلك للحديث حول التحديات والفرص والمنجزات ضمن تحسين التعليم. Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you to please warmly welcome Dr. Andreas Schleicher, OECD Director for Education and Skills, to talk about the opportunities, challenges, and achievements in improving the education. Dr. Andreas Schleicher is the Director for Education and Skills at the OECD. He initiated and oversees the program for international student assessment and other international instruments that have created a global platform for policymakers, researchers, and educators across nations and cultures to innovate and transform educational policies and practices. He has worked for over 20 years with ministers and education leaders to improve education. Former US Secretary of Education Aaron Duncan said that Schleicher understood the global issues and challenges as well as or better than anyone I've met. And he tells me the truth. Former UK Secretary of State Michelle Gove called Schleicher the most important man in English education, even though he is German and lives in France. He is the recipient of numerous honors and awards, including the Theodore Hughes Prize, awarded in the name of the first president of the Federal Republic of Germany for exemplary democratic engagement. He holds an honorary professorship. He holds an honorary professorship at the University of Heidelberg. Please welcome Dr. Schleicher.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be with you again at ETEC, a great leader in the field of evaluation and assessment. And I've listened with great interest in your work of moving the agenda of educational assessment forward. Assessment is our tool to understand the delivery at the front line and also our tool for improvement. It's very hard to improve what we cannot see, what we cannot measure. So let me share some examples of this with you. The first question that we always need to ask is, what do we want to assess? What are the policy objectives? We need to have a look at the evidence base. We need to have a look at, for example, how do we perform relative to the past and relative to the policy goals. It's not just enough to become better than we were yesterday. It's also important to see, are we delivering results that are in line with policy objectives? And then last but not least, we need to understand the context in which we try to help students learn better, teachers teach better, and schools to be more effective. And when you use international assessments, you always have to ask yourself, can what we learn from a country that is well advanced be applied in the Saudi context? Do we have to modify this? If you go to Singapore these days, you know, one of the great education leaders, you find very little of what has been originally developed in Singapore. But Singapore is probably the best player in adapting the best examples from all over the world and making them, you know, happen in their country and in a way that is often superior than these strategies worked in their original countries. So the delivery reality is the third important angle when we use data for education to improve education. And there are many layers. Of course, ultimately, everything is about student learning. Education systems are not designed around the needs of adults. They're designed around the needs of learners. But students learn based on instructional practices, the kind of interventions that we plan, the support systems that we create in order to facilitate learning. Modern teachers are designers of innovative learning environments, not just instructors. They're good coaches, good mentors, good facilitators, and of course, good evaluators. But those practices are not alone. Those practices are delivered by people, educators, leaders, support personnel, and last but not least, families. Families do a lot to stimulate the demand for high quality education service with their children, with the education system. So the people need to be reached by evaluation and assessment, and those peoples are framed by processes. How do we select teachers? How do we prepare them? What are mechanisms used to recruit the best and brightest into teaching? How do we organize the work so that we can actually retain the best people in teaching? What career perspectives do we offer? What support? What methods of supervision do we put in place? Those processes are hugely influential on the people that we will actually attract, develop, and retain in education, educators and leaders. And those processes, in turn, are shaped by tools, educational standards, our vision for what is important in education, curricula, the instruments that put those standards into practice, that frame what should be learned, what should be taught, technology, assessments, and data systems. Those are our tools to frame those kinds of environments. And ultimately, this is all about the design, the implementation, and the alignment of policies. So there are many, many layers that we need to consider when we develop 21st century assessment systems in order to facilitate better student learning outcomes. And there are also many actors involved. That's something very, very important as well. There is the system. We assess the performance of the system overall, the quality of the education system, equity in the distribution of opportunities, efficiency, value for money. There is the school. Now, we evaluate the performance of individual schools. Some schools may do well, other schools may do less well, and that may depend in part of their context and in part on productivity. There's the classroom within the school. Now, often there's a lot of variability in performance based on classrooms within a school. And then we need to ask ourselves, to what extent are we evaluating systems, schools, and classes for purposes of accountability, to see whether they are delivering what they're supposed to deliver, and to what extent do we look at aspects of improvement? And they're often very difficult to reconcile. Assessment for accountability is a very important tool, but it may put off teachers, said sometimes. Teachers, when they know what they say, what they do has consequences, may behave in different ways than when they know this has no consequences. So the improvement and accountability aspects are sometimes very difficult to combine, to reconcile. One of the hardest questions in education. Who should do that? Who are the evaluators? Who are the users of the feedback? What agencies are involved in the process? And then, with whom? Often, those evaluation processes are not taking place in isolation. They're taking place in the context of a multitude of institutions. And then, of course, there is the question of the methods and procedures. What kind of methods and technologies are being used for the evaluation process? So many actors that we need to consider. And then there are many dimensions of the evaluation process. We have the individual learner, the student. We have the instructional setting, the classroom processes. We have the schools and institutions that manage those and create those instructional settings. And then there is the system layer. What we want to know, of course, most and foremost, is the outcomes and also the outputs. What is the impact of learning? We want to understand the policy levers. Good evaluation doesn't only tell you how good are you, but it tells you how can you become better. It identifies the levers for improvement. And then, there are certain antecedents that may contextualize or constrain public policy, like, the economic kind of environment, the socioeconomic environment of families, things like that. When you think about the individual learner, it's about the quality and distribution of knowledge and skills. When you think about instructional settings, it's about the quality of teaching, quality of learning process. When you think about schools, it's the performance of institutions. And at the system level, it's the difference that education makes to social and economic development in the country. Education systems are not operating for their own sake. They're operating to serve a purpose in our economies and our societies. And that impact is a very, very important part of the evaluation process. When you think about the policy levers, it has to do with attitudes, engagement, and behavior on the part of students. Many people think of those things as external constraints, but no, we should think of them as active ingredients of the education processes things that we can change. And I'm going to show you some examples of this. When we talk about instructional settings, it's about the learning practices, the classroom climate, the institutional performance, the learning environment at school and at the system level, the structures and resource allocation process and policies. How do we mobilize and share and allocate resources? How do we align resources with needs? And then on the antecedent side, it usually is about the social and economic context of the people, the institutions, and the countries that we need to consider. Those dimensions are really very important. So let me give you some examples of this. I start with the most important part. How do we evaluate the progress of individual learners to help them become better learners? And I show you, assessment and exams have become very, very powerful through technology. We now have new types of assessments where simulations or games are being used. In the medical sector, you'll find some very advanced examples where students can do an operation and the computer can evaluate their performance in that operation. We also use adaptive assessments these days, assessments that adapt to the abilities of the learner. If you do a PISA test these days, not every student will get the same test. The students will get a test that is designed for their own ability by a computer. And we do that because if you just use one single test, one standardized test for all students, it will be far too difficult for some students and therefore very frustrating for them. And it will be far too easy for other students and therefore, not very efficient to test their skills. So the adaptiveness is very important. We can also now do hands-on assessments in vocational settings. That's the latest kind of discovery in the field of assessment. The pandemic has accelerated this because vocational education was hit very badly by the pandemic. Work-based experiences are very difficult to do. So how do we assess those kinds of experiences? And again, some very interesting examples through simulations have emerged. We can also rate open-ended tasks. So what you can see from all of this, the multiple choice tasks that used to dominate assessment for centuries, they are really sort of at the end of their line. Now, new assessments, methodologies, technologies are enabling new forms of learning and also better forms of integration. In the past, we have divorced teaching and assessment. You taught, and then at the end, you assess. And that's why teachers often hate assessments because it steals away timing from learning. Now with technology, we can integrate the process of assessment and learning so that they are becoming two sides of the same coin. I think that's a very, very important part. Classroom analytics have become very powerful. If you go to classrooms in China and nowadays, you can see many sensors in the classroom and teachers get real-time data on whether students are interested or bored by a specific task, how different students learn differently. And teachers can then use those technologies to adapt their learning processes. They can think, when is the right time to move to the next activity? Which students are falling behind? Which students need extra support? Which students should I talk to? Which may need social support? So you can see that the role of the teacher is changing with classroom analytics that have become very powerful today. And then you have robotics. That's an area where I have not seen something that convinces me from an educational perspective, but you do see social robots now happening as a form of assessment. You have, students who run coding classes and then implement their kind of ideas with robots. Things like this exist. I think they still have to prove their case, but it is something that we should, look to the future. And then there's blockchain in education. That's not so much talked about, but I think that's one of the biggest enablers of assessment in the future. One of the problems that we have today with assessment is that it's very lumpy. Now, you have many years of study, and then you do a very high stakes assessment that determines your future for many years to come. You get an entrance assessment to a university. And we do that because it's usually very, very hard to verify degrees and credentials and ensure their trustworthiness. If you ask teachers to evaluate students, we never know whether teachers do that in a reliable way, whether teachers do this in an objective way, and so on. So we are not so sure about the integrity of those data. That's why we use this kind of high stakes, standardized external exams. But with blockchain technology, we can actually link together many different forms of assessment and create a real-time picture of the learning outcomes of students. And there are very interesting examples of this now emerging. Here's an example, one that I saw when I was in Shanghai in a classroom where students learned calligraphy. That's one of the biggest headaches of Chinese teacher because, students have to learn 4,500 characters in primary school. In the Western world, we struggle with 26. So you can imagine the task that is in front of teachers. And while the students were drawing their characters, because it's not just a technique and a method, it's also an art, there was a scanner in their table. And the scanner was recording in real time the quality of their drawings and then combining this with big data analytics, giving students direct feedback on a tablet on the quality of their drawings. So you could see the student was doing their artwork, and on their telephone or the tablet, they got real-time feedback on the quality of their work. And then, that's not the end of the story, that result that the student get, but you had the teacher actually having good analytics of classroom performance. The teacher could see basically where individual students were falling behind. They could actually, assess to what extent students made common mistakes, which signal certain misconceptions in the instructional processes. So you could use those data not just for helping students learn better, but also teachers to become more effective. They could become a tool for professional learning, professional development. And teachers were sharing those kinds of lessons. The school should see that, the system could see that, and things like this. So at every layer of the system, you could analyze the same data that were collected by students' activities. And they were not taking time away from students. Students did not have to do an extra test. No, the testing was part of the learning activity. That's, I think, the power of those kinds of tools. A couple of lessons that I've learned from this. What's important is rigor, focusing on advanced cognitive demand, not on the amount of learning, but on the depth of learning, teaching fewer things at greater depths and focusing on assessing conceptual understanding rather than the accumulation of surface knowledge. If you give students lots of multiple choice tests that just test very superficial content knowledge, what will happen is that teachers will just teach the reproduction of that subject matter knowledge. If you test deep understanding of concepts, then teachers will focus much more on what matters most. So the assessment will have a very strong influence on the methods of teaching and learning. Remaining true to the disciplines is very important, but at the same time to encourage interdisciplinary learning. In PISA, we do that all the time. We give students tasks that require knowledge from multiple disciplines, because that's how the real world works these days. And then also focus on areas that have a strong transfer value. In other words, you want to test things that students can use in other circumstances, not things that are only relevant to one specific set of tasks. It's important to have learning and assessment experience that are authentic, problem-based, project-based, often involve co-creation. And then, remember, some things are not caught but taught, particularly when it comes to social and emotional aspects. They're much harder to assess, but even there, I think we have some very good examples today. So that's the hardest part, and I've spent a bit more time on this. Let's talk about some easier parts, the instructional settings. How do we assess the quality of instructional delivery? And I want to show you one example from the PISA test. Many people in Saudi Arabia have asked me, well, how do we do better on PISA? And the PISA mathematics test. And look at this chart. You can see some PISA tasks you can solve with memorization. Now you just remember the correct answer. But for other tasks, memorization is actually obstructing you from finding the right answer. If a task requires mathematical reasoning, mathematical analysis, and you expect to know the answer, you will never find it. No? So yes, memorization can be good. Memorization can be harmful. And now, if you look at the individual PISA tasks in mathematics, you can see you can only solve the very simplest task with memorization. For most of the more complex mathematical tasks that really require you to think like a mathematician, memorization skills are harmful. And in Saudi Arabia, they are still the most dominant form of learning, no? And the most dominant form of assessment. If you want to do well on the PISA test, you need to become better at elaboration strategies, no? Applying knowledge creatively, extrapolating from what you know. That's basically linking what you know with what you don't know, thinking creatively about problems, understanding the ideas and concepts of mathematics. If you're good at that, you solve the most complex mathematics problems. Why do we do this? Because the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test have also become easy to automate, to digitize. They're disappearing from our labor markets. That's basically why this is so important. And you know, at the beginning, I mentioned the importance of attitudes. And you can say, well, you know, why is it the role of schools to shape attitudes of students? But here you can see some of them belong to the best predictors of PISA performance. Now, here I mark the idea of growth mindset. To what extent do students believe in their own ability to change outcomes? If I look at Estonia, for example, the #1 performer in the OECD area, students do very well on PISA, but they also believe that they own their success. If I look at Indonesia, you can see they struggle with PISA, and they also believe that there's nothing they can change. My success depends on inherited intelligence. If I'm not born intelligent, I will not be successful. And you can see that's also the predominant perception in Saudi Arabia. So if schools can change the mindset of students by giving them tasks where they can overcome difficulties, where they can show effort, persistence, and succeed ultimately, you can see strengthening growth mindset could become one of the predictors for actually doing better. That's why in evaluation and assessment, we should look beyond cognitive performance. Modern assessment should try to capture a wide range of cognitive, social, and emotional factors because we know that they are mattering a lot. I give you another example. Boys and girls now have more or less the same performance in science. So if you look at a science cognitive test, you'll see that boys and girls have similar good results. But when you ask boys and girls, do you want to become a scientist? The boys will say yes, the girls will say no. So if we ignore that social and emotional attachment to the disciplines, we will ignore a big part of the future. That's, I think, a very important aspect. It's harder, those aspects are harder to measure, but equally important. I also show you where students had a better growth mindset, they were more motivated to master difficult tasks. They had a greater sense of self-efficacy. They were less afraid of failure. They were more ready to establish ambitious learning goals. And they saw greater value in schooling. So you can see growth mindset is a very important aspect for learning in general. Let me briefly touch on the institutions. Looking at institutional performance, this is one of the most instructive charts on this. Basically, what you can see here is that, you know, on the vertical axis, you see the skills of adults, 25 to 65-year-olds. And then in green, I've marked those who have a university qualification. In red, those who have a high school degree. And in the cross, those who have less than upper secondary education. And when you look at this, you can see a Japanese high school graduate has better skills than, for example, an Irish, Korean, Canadian, or even more so on the left side, university graduate. So credentials don't tell you that much about the real skills of people. Assessment and evaluation is about finding out the real skills of people, not, you know, degrees and qualifications that actually may not be very predictive of the skills of people. This chart is very, very impressive in the sense that, you know, the degrees actually tell us surprisingly little about the actual skills that people have. That's why your work at ETEC is so important. If I look to Brazil, you can see how strongly institutional performance on the vertical axis depends on the social context of schools. Every dot on this chart is one school. The bigger dots are the bigger schools, the smaller dots are the smaller schools. And you can see there's a strong relationship between the social and economic context and the outcomes of schooling. Well, but it's not all of the story. For example, if I compare Brazil with Vietnam, you can see in Vietnam, families are even poorer and schools are poorer. But the lines are much higher. Schools in similar contexts in Vietnam do much better than schools in similar contexts in Brazil. And that's very, very important for evaluation. You can see the same thing within Brazil. Here you have two schools that have the same social context. One does quite well, better than the OECD average. One does very poorly. So you need to evaluate the outcomes of learning always in the context of individual schools' situations. That's another important function of assessment, never to evaluate outcomes by themselves if you want to improve things, but always to consider the antecedents in which those outcomes actually happen. And last but not least, looking at the economic context, you can see very clearly is that wealth and money are not very good predictors of learning outcomes. Some countries spend a lot, are very wealthy, are not doing so well. Other countries spend quite limited amounts of resources and have very strong performance. It's all a question of productivity. The same is true with learning time. You can see with the blue bars that the volume of learning time varies very, very significantly across countries. Some countries have very long school days when it comes to language learning. Others have very low school days. But when it comes to productivity, you can see basically there are huge differences. If you go to Vietnam, to Finland, to Estonia, students learn a lot in very little time. If you go to the Philippines or Thailand or Morocco, students spend a lot of time and learn very little. And that's also still the challenge for Saudi Arabia. It's not so much adding learning time. It's more about raising productivity. So assessment and evaluation should look at this aspect of productivity at the system level. So these are some of the features I wanted to share with you. As you can see, it is a complex undertaking to build a 21st century evaluation and assessment system. But I also think we have very good instruments and very good experiences at how to do that best from the international scene. And with this, I will leave you here. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the International Conference on Education and Training Evaluation, Improving Learning Outcomes and Supporting Economic Growth. To attend and participate, choose your favorite language. Sign in, then click on Conference. For further information, to ask questions directly, click here. To download the conference presentations, click here. To share ideas and opinions, please visit the conference forum. For technical support, click here. مرحبا بكم في المؤتمر الدولي لتقويم التعليم والتدريب، تجويد نواتج التعلم ودعم النمو الاقتصادي. للحضور والمشاركة اختر لغتك المفضلة، قم بتسجيل الدخول ثم الضغط على المؤتمر لمعرفة المزيد من المعلومات. في حال رغبتك بطرح سؤال مباشر اضغط هنا. لتحميل العروض اضغط هنا. لتبادل الآراء قم بزيارة المنتدى. للدعم الفني اضغط هنا.